Much like their namesake, the Seattle Kraken were unleashed a few years ago, making it into the playoffs and upsetting the Colorado Avalanche on their way to the first playoff victory in franchise history. Last year, though, was a step back as the Kraken failed to make the playoffs due to a mixture of bad luck, bad goaltending, and bad coaching. It has been an offseason full of changes in Seattle, with big free agent signings and big changes behind the bench. So is that going to mean a big step forward back into the playoffs for the Kraken this year?
I admit it. Last year was rough.
It was quite literally a roller coaster season for the Seattle Kraken in 2023-24. A very slow start in October that put them behind the 8 ball was followed up by a string of pretty good success. A 9-game winning streak at the end of the calendar year put the Kraken 5 games above 500 at the middle of January. They were right back in the thick of the playoff hunt, and people expected that they were going to continue to push for that wildcard spot. Then, unfortunately, came a couple of brutal stretches, one in which they lost 6 of 10, and then another in which they suffered an 8-game losing streak where they collected only 2 points. That was effectively the death knell of the Seattle Kraken season, and they finished the year just 1 game under 500 at a 34-35-13 record. But while the Kraken didn't have the greatest goaltending last year, the biggest problem that led to their failure in 2023-24 was scoring. They just didn't do enough of it, scoring the 4th fewest goals of any team in the NHL. With no player on the team scoring more than 30 goals or 65 points. That's something the Kraken are hoping will change this season. Those poor, pitiful souls who thought Dave Haxtell had improved from his time in Philadelphia were proven wrong last year, as he revealed that he was still, in fact, the same old hack he has always been. With the team having missed the playoffs in 2 of his 3 years as their head coach, he was relieved of his duties at the end of the season, replaced by their AHL affiliates head coach, Dan Bilesma? The guy who fucked up a golden ticket in Pittsburgh and then went and ran the Buffalo Sabres into the ground? Something that I didn't even believe was possible, given how big a dumpster fire of a franchise that is. But apparently everything he did down in Coachella Valley really impressed Seattle Kraken brass, because he's got a lot of support within the organization after taking the Firebirds to the Calder Cup Finals last year. He is a former Stanley Cup champion, you have to hand it to him for that, and you can write off his failed tenure in Buffalo as being a function of their dysfunction, even though it seems that a lot of the problems during that tenure were caused by him. We'll just have to see if Shane Wright and Matty Beniers are going to become a Jack Eichel 2.0 situation in Seattle.
You're a star, you're on top, somebody bring you some hand. You should kill yourself.
There is no star player for the Seattle Kraken, there is only mediocrity. That's not an exaggeration. Nobody on the Seattle Kraken scored more than 65 points last year, or 30 goals. Their highest scoring player was Jared McCann, who had 62 points and 29 goals. You would think that that would make him the organization's best player by default, but I'm actually going to go with defenseman Vince Dunn. Just a year removed from being an all-star and in Norris consideration, Vince Dunn suffered a severe neck injury last year that cost him about a third of the season, coming at the beginning of March when, not so coincidentally, is when the Kraken went into their final downward tailspin. Dunn is one of the most underrated defensemen in the NHL in my opinion. He is very solid in both the offensive and defensive zones, able to play on both the power play and penalty kill. He's kind of the perfect avatar for the entire Kraken organization. He doesn't really show up even when he's performing well, and it's only when you step back and look at things you go, that guy's a pretty good defenseman. He does a lot of little things right, and that's why he's one of my favorite defensemen that nobody talks about.
Oh, this guy again.
Looking at the Seattle Kraken forward core, it is quite clear why they struggled to score goals last year. It's a lot of second and third line players being thrust into very prominent roles, which they're either not capable of handling or past their prime in being able to handle. Jared McCann being your top scorer is an indication of how bad things are, even though he's a pretty good player who took a major step forward the last few years in Seattle. They were relying on Matty Beniers to continue to develop and take a step forward last year after his Rookie of the Year campaign, but unfortunately it was a step downward. Him going from a 57-point campaign to 37 points last year is just proof that progress is not linear. Unfortunately for Beniers, it came right before he was set to ink an extension, so it's probably going to knock down his... Never mind then. What is it with teams overpaying their young players right off of their rookie contracts when they haven't proven anything? You're paying this guy like he's a 70, 80 point player when he hasn't even hit 60 yet. I said it all with Slavkovsky, but I'm going to say it again with Beniers. This is a huge risk to take on a young player. I would have signed him to a bridge deal for about $4 to $5 mil, and if he breaks out into an elite player and you have to pay that tax, you do that. But right now you're paying him more than guys like Gabe Landeskog and Troy Terry on the hope that he's going to outperform the contract. Maybe he will. but also maybe he won't. Rounding out that first line is a past his prime Jordan Eberle, who is still good for 40 to 50 points a year. Jaden Schwartz is the epitome of a middle six forward, who is also on the back half of his career and hasn't scored over 50 points in a year since 2019, yet he is still expected to log major time on the second power play unit. May the Schwartz be with you. Alongside new free agent Chandler Stevenson, you have Andre Burakovsky on the second line, another guy who should be on the third line on most teams and is playing major second line power play minutes. As a Caps fan, let me tell you right now, that ain't gonna work out too well. Eli Tolvanen, Yanni Gourde, and Oliver Bjorkstrand make up a decent third line. I mean, I'm not gonna say that any of those guys are out of place, and Tolvanen in particular has shown some flashes of upside. The emphasis is on flashes, as he scored 40 points for the first time last year. Let's see if he can keep that up. Pretty good third line, all things considering. The problem is you just have two of them. The fourth line is a mix of experience with youth. Brandon Tanev alongside Ty Cartier and Shane Wright. Wright is the big X factor for the Seattle forwards this year. The hope is that he's going to take a big step forward and hopefully push some guys out of the top 6 as he ascends this year. If it happens, Seattle is cooking. If it doesn't, they're going to struggle to score once again this year. Dunn anchors the top pairing alongside Adam Larson, the big body who came into New Jersey with so much hype, only to be a bitter disappointment for both them and the Oilers. I don't know if you can throw the term pylon out there for Adam Larson, but he's definitely more of a second pairing defenseman than a first pairing. Speaking of second pairing, that's where the shiny new Brandon Montour will be paired up with Jamie Oleksiak. That's a pretty solid synergy right there, as Montour's offense will pair well with Jamie Oleksiak's stay-at-home tendencies. And then the youth movement on the third pairing, with young Riker Evans at 22 years old being paired with Will Borgen, who is at the ripe old age of 27, the veteran of the two. Evans seemed fine in the 36 games he played last year. There's definitely still big room to improve, and hopefully a guy like Borgen can at least provide a steadying presence alongside it. It's Philip Grubauer and Joey Decord manning between the pipes. Even though Gruby was the big flashy name that the Kraken got in their inception, it's been Decord who's been the better goaltender for most of their time as a pair. Last year at age 27, he posted his best year, a .916 save percentage and a .246 goals against average, which compares very nicely to Grubauer, who has not been a .900 save percentage goalie ever since he's arrived in Seattle. But don't worry, Kraken fans, you only have that anchor of a contract on your books for another 3 years. It'll go by like that.
Britta's in this?
Like I said earlier, the Kraken went out and spent big in this offseason, adding 2 marquee free agents. The first being Stanley Cup champion Brandon Montour on the defense, inking him to a 7-year, $50 million contract. I'm not gonna lie, this contract gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies, considering that Montour is 30 entering this year, so this contract's gonna carry him well past his prime. And also, he really only has 1 year of elite productivity. Sure, he was good in his 4 years in Florida, but before that, it was very much a mixed bag. Unfortunately, when it comes to their other big signing this offseason to shore up the top 6, Chandler Stevenson, you can take all of those same fears I listed for Montour and add in the fact that he never had that 1 year of elite productivity like Montour. Another 7-year term for $6.25 million a year, that could be looking really ugly really quickly, especially if it turns out that Stevenson's productivity was largely due to being a part of that high-scoring Vegas offense. In the first round, the Kraken took Berkeley Catton out of Spokane, a promising young center who I think was a bit overdrafted in the top 10, but is still a very viable choice. The only thing is that, much like the Kraken, you may as well put this kid on a milk carton, because if you showed me a picture of the entire 2024 NHL draft class in their jerseys on the night of the draft, I could not find this kid. It'd be like the most impossible Where's Waldo of all time.
That's not bad.
I may have clowned on the contract extension, but honestly, I really like Matty Beniers, and I think that he is poised to take a step forward this year. Unlike a guy like Slavkovsky, Beniers has a pedigree behind him, including a Calder Trophy win, and his down year last year was due to him being on a team that was historically bad at scoring and not having any support around him. I am hopeful, not necessarily confident, that Beniers can be that guy to become a 70-80 point player and perform to his contract's expectation. I don't know if the changes they made in the offseason are going to necessarily enable that right now, but I think that the talent is there. If he puts it all together, he's going to be the guy leading the charge for Seattle in the years to come.
The Gambletron 2000 says the winner is Cincinnati by 200 points. Why, you worthless hunk of junk?
The Kraken made a lot of big moves, and honestly, they were a pretty good team last year that got undone by bad goaltending. They should be a team that is a candidate for a bounce-back year. Unfortunately, they still have those same goaltenders behind them, and even if Joey Decor's last season was the start of his ascension, they still got to figure out a way to score some goddamn goals, and I don't think adding Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour really makes a dent in this. Like I said, it's going to kind of come down to Matty Beniers and Shane Wright to lead the charge, and as confident as I am in Beniers, I am not confident in Shane Wright, and I am even less confident in Dan Bilesma. I fear that this team is going to be doomed to a fate worse than being dragged to the briny depths by the Kraken. Eternal mediocrity and the hope that the next crop of new prospects are going to be the ones to finally lead them out of the briny deep.
As a Kraken fan going into last season, I had some expectations, but then they absolutely flopped. This team is too damn inconsistent.
They stole Jordan Eberle from us.
If there's anything I hate about other Kraken fans, it's how fickle they are towards Gruby. He can't stretch umpteen different directions to stop shots when Haxtell set the defense up. So goddamn poorly, GDI, fickle bastards.